Hey everybody, it's Scott from Passport Attitude. Thanks so much for stopping by my site. I really appreciate it. I want to encourage you to be an explorer, no matter whether you're at home or abroad. I hope this site is a place you can find inspiration, get new ideas, and learn something new about the world, and perhaps about yourself. In the next few moments, I'm going to be sharing with you a presentation I gave in 2017 at the American Volkssport Association in Billings, Montana. This is for their national convention. I hope you find this talk inspirational, informative, interesting, and it's going to be about an hour long, but you've probably got plenty of time right about now. So enjoy, and this is also accompanied by a PowerPoint. So sit back, buckle up, and get ready for some fun. October 2006, in the Vienna woods of Austria. I was nestled in my bed at Haus Edelweiss, and the email read something like this. You need to prepare for the fact that you may not have a job when you return home. This devastating digital salvo, sent by my boss from half a world away, left me utterly crushed, caused a flood of tears to flow as I prepared for next morning's long journey home to my wife and my 3 young daughters, who were then just ages 6, 4, and 1. At the time of this emotional evening, I was an associate pastor at a large multi-campus church in Washington State, and I had just spent a couple of weeks as the leader of a mission team that was serving an Austrian-based ministry, whose aim it was to help church leaders throughout Eastern Europe. It had been a wonderful fortnight, full of encouraging interaction with other cultures, along with some exciting sightseeing nearby in Vienna and along the Danube River, places that I had never before seen. But all of that fun and that good feeling changed in an instant as I faced the reality that the only career I had ever trained for, professional paid ministry, may be in jeopardy. Well, what brought me to this pivotal moment, you may ask? Well, in a nutshell, and to spare you the details, I had become the kind of person who was willing to cross borders, not just in the literal sense, as I was doing in Austria at the moment, but in other ways as well. I had become concerned with certain questions that forced me to look outside of my own little bubble, questions that unfortunately put me at odds with a group of very good and kind coworkers, but a group nonetheless that had no wiggle room to think differently about certain things. There were borders of thinking, and in this case theology, that were not to be crossed, and yet I felt compelled to go beyond the bubble, even for a little while, just to consider other opinions and viewpoints to try to sharpen my thinking about these things. I increasingly felt that it was imperative for me to question certain ideas that had previously gone unchallenged, and this border-crossing act of curiosity, which I had initiated early in 2006, had now left me on the brink of an unknown future, one that I found quite scary at the time. In fact, this picture that you see of me right now on top of Half Dome in Yosemite National Park is a very fitting metaphor for how I felt in 2006. It was just before this amazing hike that I had gone public with some of my coworkers and friends about my nagging questions, and it was this desire to be open and truthful with them that had set the wheels in motion of my current situation. So when I see this picture of me on the edge, staring at the Yosemite Valley 5,000 feet below me, there's a heck of a lot of symbolism in the frame. It was thrilling and scary at the very same time. See, on the one hand, it was thrilling to be exploring new ideas, asking important questions that I had previously ignored. But this exploration was also very scary because I really didn't know where it was going to lead. More and more, I was feeling like I needed to find a different career, as much as I loved and still love the people that I worked alongside. I needed to be able to ask questions without feeling like my job was at stake. But this was uncharted territory for me, and I, as I mentioned, was frightened beyond words. So as I lay in my bed in Austria on that fateful and snowy late October evening, so many new and intensely practical questions were coming to my mind. If I lost my job, how would I take care of my beautiful little girls? How would I put food on the table and pay for our house? While my wife had a master's in education and was a terrific teacher, she was currently staying at home to be with our girls while they were going through these very formative and irreplaceable years. So I was our sole breadwinner at the time. How are we going to make ends meet? What would I tell my extended family and friends? How could I face their possible disappointment, as well as my own? You see, at that point, my identity was largely wrapped up in being a pastor. I'd invested enormous amounts of time and treasure in this career, and I didn't necessarily want it to come to a crashing halt, especially when I didn't have an exit strategy. So to say I was seriously shaking in my boots would be an understatement. So with my recently renewed passport in hand, and with my fellow mission team members in tow, I proceeded with a heavy heart through border control at Vienna International Airport the next morning, not knowing if I would face a potential pastor disaster and lose everything I had labored for during my entire adult career. But little did I know that my life was about to take a very unexpected turn that would launch me on an epic journey spanning all 7 continents. You see, the passport that I renewed in September 2006, the one that I have here in my hands, in anticipation of that Austrian mission trip, it would be the same travel document used to cross countless borders in the coming decade, as I very unexpectedly became a paid international man of mystery, eventually returning multiple times to Vienna as a walking adventures planner and tour guide. Well, how in the world did this happen, you may ask? Well, this presentation that I'm sharing with you today will serve as your visa, granting entry into the wild yet wonderful world of a former minister who became an international adventure guide. And along the way, as I share some stories of where this passport has taken me and the people it has allowed me to meet, I hope to inspire you to use your passport, not just in the literal sense, but to use your passport in the metaphorical sense as well, becoming an explorer right in your own backyard, being open and eager to making new discoveries and to interact with people and ideas of all stripes, even if you never set foot in another country. You see, the beauty of owning and using a passport is that it provides you the unique opportunity of getting beyond your bubble, of seeing the world from someone else's perspective, perhaps even changing your mind in some small or maybe even significant ways. Using your passport in both the global and the local sense is about developing an explorer's mindset, and it's a great way to grow and learn that matches up very well with taking an active walk once in a while. Walking for a few hours at a time, as many of my walking adventures friends do, offers wonderful and surprising ways to use your passport, whether you're strolling in Switzerland or hiking in your own hometown. So, fasten your seatbelts, put your tray table and seat in the fully upright position, and prepare to do some serious exploring with me today. I'm hoping that a few items in your overhead bin may shift during this brief flight. In any case, whether you end up agreeing with me or not, I'm really grateful that you're willing to take this journey with me, and I hope that our time together is both beneficial and inspiring. Now, back to our story. What happened when I got home from Vienna in 2006? Well, to make a long story short, I was able to temporarily salvage my job at the church. You see, I got along very well with my fellow staff members. They just didn't want me asking so many questions. But to be truthful, my questions still remained, and they even expanded, but for the time being, I just stuffed them deep inside, and I agreed to toe the party line. But I knew without a doubt that for my own personal sanity, I had to find something else to do for a career, and the sooner the better. On one hand, I was scared to leave the only career I'd been trained for, but I decided to use my metaphorical passport and begin an earnest and deliberate search for what might be next. I went beyond my previously self-imposed career borders, searching high and low for job opportunities that might fit my personality, passions, and skill set, and there were a lot of dead ends and false leads during that search. But in December of 2006, just a couple months after my pivotal trip to Vienna, Austria, I discovered the online job advertisement that would dramatically and amazingly alter the course of my life, though it wouldn't happen overnight. I had stumbled upon an ad from a company I'd never even heard of before, Walking Adventures International. They were looking for 2-person guide teams to help them lead a variety of their tours around the world. And having been a lifelong lover of walking, geography, travel, world cultures, history, and introducing people to new and interesting places, this job posting certainly piqued my interest, but I almost immediately moved on to other job postings because I was only one person, couldn't be a 2-person guide team all by myself, to state the obvious. There were other big doubts in my mind as to whether this job posting was even worth pursuing. It was only a part-time job, very occasional job, and if I was going to transition to a different full-time career, I was going to need more than a part-time job. It was also based in Vancouver, Washington, which was in the same state, but nearly 3 hours away from where our family currently lived. So if I did find a way to overcome these obstacles, I would still need to find a way to guide a trip or two while still working full-time at my current job. This tour guide job would take some creative thinking to even begin pursuing, but I was so intrigued by what I saw in this company, and I was highly motivated to find a different career path, so I put on my thinking cap and started to dream about how this might possibly work. And as you may have guessed by the fact that I'm talking to you today as a tour planner and guide for walking adventures, all of these objections were eventually overcome. But it seemed like such a long shot at the time. If I hadn't been deliberate in exploring new possibilities, using my metaphorical passport, I never would have come across the job posting in the first place. If I had let fear of failure paralyze me, or if I had let all the objections stand in the way, I never would have taken the next steps and initiated contact with Dan at Walking Adventures. So even in the beginning, when it looked like there might be a good fit with this tour guide job, there were still a lot of obstacles to hurdle, and it would have been easy to give up on this dream before it was even out of the gates. But amazingly, with a few bumps along the way, and with a great deal of flexibility, I might add, from my good friends at Walking Adventures and my wonderful family, I eventually made the transition from full-time pastor to international tour guide. Not exactly your normal career path. And this border crossing into a surprising career has opened up a new world of discoveries for me that I would have never dreamed possible. Starting with a tour of Italy in October 2007, I set out on a joyful journey that continues to this day, and every time I look at this passport of mine, I'm flooded with emotions, full of gratitude for what was a very unexpected turn of events over a decade ago. You see, this is more than just a little blue book with stamps in it. This thing is stacked with stories, it's loaded with life lessons, it's maxed out with memories, and packed full of people who have had an impact on me. And with our remaining time, I want to share some snapshots, some important lessons that I've been reminded while literally using my passport. But I would also like to suggest some ways that you can use your metaphorical passport, how you can develop a passport attitude right here at home, being a lifelong explorer. I could go on and on for hours, but I don't want to have my visa revoked, so I'll try to be brief. And today we're going to go to all 7 continents. Isn't that exciting? On this virtual voyage. So let's get started with North America. On page 9 of my passport, I received a stamp from July 22nd, 2008, as I entered Mexico on a Copper Canyon planning trip. It was on that scouting journey in the high mountains of the Sierra Madre Occidental Range that I met a remarkable man who taught me that age is just a number and that you're never too old to challenge yourself. Victoriano Churro is one of about 50,000 indigenous Tarahumara people who inhabit the rugged and mountainous Copper Canyon region of Mexico. The name Tarahumara is actually a Spanish corruption of the word Raramuri, which means running people. See, the Tarahumara didn't always have such a high altitude mailing address. At one point, they lived in the lower elevations throughout much of the state of Chihuahua. When the Spanish arrived in the 16th century, however, their life was completely disrupted, as you can imagine, and thus they lived up to their name for themselves, Raramuri, and they became a running people, retreating to the upper reaches of Copper Canyon in order to be free from the dominating influence of these foreign oppressors. In addition to their very traditional lifestyles, the Tarahumara are known for their extraordinary long-distance running abilities, traveling from village to village in the Copper Canyon, sometimes packing large loads. It's easy to see how the Tarahumara might develop superhuman endurance. In fact, the endurance of the Tarahumara runners is so staggering, and I kid you not, that they are able to literally run a deer to death. Traditionally hunting in groups of 4 or 5 people, the Tarahumara pursue their prey from different angles, sometimes chasing it for well over 100 miles. Eventually, that animal is so worn out from the constant harrying that it slows down, which allows the Tarahumara hunters to get close enough to kill it. My advice to Bambi? Stay the heck out of Copper Canyon. And this brings us back to Victoriano Churro. In 1993, Rick Fisher, a Copper Canyon guide, author, and a friend of the Tarahumara, took 3 Raramuri runners, including Victoriano, to Colorado to compete in the Leadville Trail 100, which is an elite, incredibly taxing ultramarathon high in the Rocky Mountains. The race is known as one of the toughest in the world, with elevations ranging from 10,000 feet all the way up to 12,600 feet. You see, Rick wanted to see how the Tarahumara would fare against the best long-distance runners in the world. Apparently, Victoriano so desperately wanted to be on this running team that he lied about his age, thinking that they wouldn't allow him to compete in Leadville if they knew how old he really was. He told them he was 38, the same age as one of his Tarahumara running mates. In reality, he was 55. And upon arrival in Colorado, Rick Fisher and his team Rara Murray did a little shoe shopping. And what kind of high-performance footwear do you suppose these astounding runners prefer? If you guessed Adidas, Reebok, or Nike, you'd be way off. Try Firestone, Michelin, or Goodyear instead. You see, Victoriano claims to have no brand loyalty, but he definitely prefers to wear homemade sandals made from rubber tires. Team Rara Murray did their shoe shopping at the Leadville junkyard, at the dump, cutting their own sandals from discarded tires and cobbling them together with nails and leather strips. Even to this day, Victoriano makes his own shoes. It takes him about 30 minutes, with each pair lasting him about a year. In spite of Team Rara Murray's preference to run on all-season radials, Nike sponsored the Leadville race, and they gave all of the runners, including the Tarahumara, brand new, top-of-the-line, swoosh-branded sneakers. Obligingly, Victoriano and his teammates donned the donated footwear. But after 13.5 miles, Victoriano and his fellow Tarahumara runners were no longer willing to sell their souls to the corporate sponsors. No, no, no. They ditched those Nikes, and they opted instead for their tried-and-true rubber tire sandals. And as the race wore on, Victoriano ran neck and neck with his younger teammate, Sorido Chacarito. At the 60.5-mile marker in the race, after the Twin Lakes aid station, they say that the terrain there is so steep that absolutely nobody runs up that section of the trail. Well, that was apparently until Victoriano and Cerrito came to town. You see, eyewitnesses report these two running up that trail like the very deer that their people have pursued for centuries. At the 87th mile, check this out, Victoriano was seen chugging a beer, a beverage not known for its fitness-enhancing qualities, before completing the last 13 miles on his way to a spectacular and totally unanticipated first-place finish at the age of 55. His victory, along with the second and fifth place finishes of his teammates, left many in the ultramarathon community completely awestruck, and it further cemented the reputation of the Tarahumara runners as some of the best athletes in the world. You see, the running of the 1993 Leadville Trail 100 was a study in contrasts. The majority of this elite running crowd were outfitted in nothing but the finest high-tech gear. They were aided by corporate-sponsored support teams. They were dedicated to a strict nutritional exercise program, familiar with the science of short-twitch muscle fiber, and they were religiously dedicated to stretching and warming up before each race. And in the middle of this crowd stood three men wearing traditional Tarahumara garb and discarded tires. They didn't stretch or warm up on the day of the race. They had no interest in training for the Leadville event because it didn't involve chasing anything, like deer. And instead of power bars and Gatorade, they had a penchant for unfiltered cigarettes and Budweiser. There was nothing about these Copper Canyon natives that indicated they would obliterate the competition in this race, and yet that's exactly what they did. About 2 weeks before coming to Mexico for our Copper Canyon planning trip, I was doing some research on the area. I was using my metaphorical passport. I was trying to understand this world that I was about to enter, and in my reading, I came across a book that mentioned Victoriano and his amazing Leadville triumph. And upon our arrival by train in this remote mountainous region, my dad and I were met by a local guide from Hradcany named Mario. And as Mario drove down the bumpy road to San Isidro Lodge, I asked him if he knew of a Tarahumara man named Victoriano Churro, and he whipped his head around so fast he nearly got whiplash, and he looked somewhat shocked and surprised, and he said, "How do you know Victoriano?" And I said, "Well, I read about his incredible victory in Colorado in 1993. And Mario then proceeded to tell me that he knew Victoriano quite well and that he lived only 5 minutes away from San Isidro Lodge. Thus it came to pass that after a beautiful morning walk along the Urique Canyon the next day, I came face to face with this living legend in the middle of nowhere. As Mario escorted us on foot from San Isidro Lodge, we caught our first glimpse of Victoriano as he was working in his cornfield. And after exchanging a Tarahumara greeting, Quiribá, Victoriano invited us to visit with him outside his home. With Sergio and Mario's translation help, I told them I'd been eagerly awaiting the chance to meet him, since reading about his running prowess. My eyes were immediately drawn to his rubber sandals and the weather-worn phalanges that carried him to victory. Though Victoriano was very short, he was obviously a strong and vibrant man, even at age 70. He had an infectious smile and an overabundance of energy for a septuagenarian. He had just finished making a small new home next to his old one. Construction only lasted a month. And as we ducked inside his old home, Victoriano showed us a new pair of shoes he was working on. After showing him the excerpt of the book that I read, which mentioned his name, we visited for a while longer before saying our goodbyes. And I'll tell you this, it was a day I won't soon forget. You see, in a world dominated by corporate sponsors and Nike swooshes, it was refreshing to meet a man for whom "just do it" is far more than just a slogan. Victoriano is a man of endurance and strength who showed me that age is just a number and that you can accomplish great things even late in life. So when I look at page 9 in my passport and I see that stamp, I remember this man's incredible story. Another reminder from North America occurred when, during a scouting trip to the Canadian Rockies, I was with my wife Debbie, 2014, and this is a lesson that all of you walkers know very well already, and that is, it's always best to hike with friends. Except in this case, at Consolation Lakes, near the famous Moraine Lake and Lake Louise, it's actually mandated that you hike in groups of at least 4 people, because the trail at Consolation Lakes is prime grizzly territory. There's a 4-person minimum that's strictly mandated for safety. In fact, you can receive a fine of $5,000 for not complying, not to mention you could become an hors d'oeuvre for a local bear. Deb and I waited for a while at this trailhead, and eventually an older couple came along, and they agreed to walk with us to this picture-perfect reflection of a lake. We were the only humans in this basin, and it was just perfect. We also had fun getting to know this couple and helping each other at stream crossings. On the way back, however, we did pass a lady who was hiking single with her dog while eating a Snickers bar in very clear violation of the 4-person mandate. She might as well have wrapped herself in bacon, rolled in honey, and sent out a stenciled invitation to the local bear populace saying, "Come and dine." I don't know whatever came of that lady. I never saw her again. But I do know that even when safety is not an issue, it's often a lot more rewarding to walk with friends. This is something that the walking clubs I work with do very well, and it's also a hallmark of our Walking Adventures tour. There is joy in sharing the journey with others and using your passports together. There's greater protection against some of the risks that come with travel, and there are really beautiful moments and memories to be made when we travel this life's trails in community with others. Going it solo is just begging to be bear bait. And I'd have to say, one of my favorite things about leading tours with Walking Adventures is that it gives me the opportunity to explore with other like-minded people who love to discover new territory, who enjoy learning about the history, culture, and scenery of places other than their own. Using your passport, literally and metaphorically, I think it's best done in groups. And now, let's move on to South America, the second continent on our 7-continent journey. This is a mysterious and magical place for adventure. You know, I think using your passport helps you better put the puzzle pieces of history together. I was just recently in Machu Picchu, Peru, gazing in wonder at the amazing Incan stonework throughout the Sacred Valley. The thriving Incan Empire of the 15th and 16th century, they were experts at carving stone for buildings and monuments and making those puzzle pieces fit together so well that you sometimes can't even fit a credit card between the gaps. It's really a marvel to behold. They knew how to make the puzzle pieces fit. And related to this, one of the joys of traveling or reading widely, of using your passport, of having that passport attitude, is that you're better able to connect some of the puzzle pieces of history. You no longer look at events or people as isolated, independent participants in world history. You start to connect the dots. You see how interrelated and intertwined our stories really are, how we fit together. For example, the Incas were not just geniuses of stonework, they were also masters of plant domestication. And this was especially the case with potatoes. Their development of the potato was remarkable. From 8 species of weeds having toxic tubers to more than 3,000 distinct potato varieties. That's pretty staggering. And it was that very potato that was domesticated by the Incas that became one important part of the Columbian Exchange that took place after 1492. That important little tuber became such a critical food crop that when it was brought to Europe, it helped propel a few European nations to prominence by allowing them to better feed their growing populations, and it helped a couple of them become dominant colonial powers. Then, an over-reliance on that one crop in Ireland, for example, had really devastating effects during the potato famine in the 1840s, and that led to a wave of immigration that brought many of the Irish to the US and Canada. Very interesting. Using your passport and traveling or reading widely helps you better understand these connections. It helps you have a greater appreciation of our shared history. Who knew the potato would have such an effect? And now, another lesson from South America. As we venture into the Amazon region, one of the best parts of exploring beyond your borders is that doing so can help you confront your fears. You know, we all have legitimate fears, and for good reasons. Our fear instincts help us avoid getting too close to dangerous situations that could bring us harm, or even worse, kill us. There's nothing wrong with being afraid of the right things. It's actually pretty helpful. But too often, we end up fearing some things out of all proportion to the actual threat that they pose to us. And these phobias can be pretty paralyzing, and they can sometimes rob us of experiences and lessons that would otherwise enrich our lives. So I think it can be a good part of your growing process to actively and willingly overcome some of your fears. When I was on the Amazon River in 2012, I made a decision to overcome two of my biggest fears, both at the same time. I have always had a deep loathing and fear of snakes and all things crocodilian. As a small child, I couldn't even look at a toy alligator or a picture of a crocodile without busting into tears. I was that mortified by them. The thought of even touching these animals, even the small ones, instilled a really unrealistic fear in me. But in a fairly controlled setting, at a floating home on the river, on the Amazon, where it appeared that others were holding these animals without harm, I decided I'd take a small step and try to overcome this fear. And I'm really glad that I did, even though I don't plan to become a snake handler or a gator wrestler anytime soon. Sometimes it's good to confront your fears, even if it's in just a small way and in a way that is safe. And next, on to our third continent. Let's go visit Africa, shall we? Using my passport on a 2013 planning trip to Tanzania, I had what was one of my most unusual experiences ever, when Dan and I woke up at the crack of dawn and we took a rough dirt road into the heart of the East African wilderness, where we were in search of a hunter-gatherer tribe known as the Hadzabe people. This group of Tanzanian bushmen speak a click language, you know that. I don't speak it fluently, obviously. There are only about 250 of them left. Like our Stone Age ancestors, they live by hunting and gathering, without any permanent homes, and they have no herds of animals, nor do they practice agriculture or really integrate with the rest of Tanzanian society. Gaining a small window into this culture was like traveling in a time machine back to when all of humanity was living this way, several thousand years ago. With the help of a translator who could speak the Hadzabe click language, we were actually able to make contact with them and even go hunting for birds in the Tanzanian wilderness with them. They are quite good with the bow and arrow and even use poisonous arrows to bring down bigger game. We were able to bag one bird during our hunt among the dazzling baobab trees near Lake Eyasi. Spending a day with the Hadzabe made me appreciate the different kind of human communities that have developed over time. I can't imagine living like they do, and yet that's all they've known, and it's what most people have known through most of human history. What an unforgettable experience, and yet another stamp in my passport on page H that comes alive with meaning for me. Another important lesson from Africa has to do with the animal kingdom and the magnificent rhino, a majestic animal that's threatened by wrong beliefs. This incredible species is seriously endangered, and much of it has to do with poaching. And why would this animal be poached? Well, primarily because of its horn and the mistaken belief that it holds medicinal value. The medicinal use of rhino horn dates back centuries, and it's primarily practiced in Asian countries such as Malaysia, Korea, Vietnam, India, and China. The horn is prescribed by some of these practitioners for several symptoms and illnesses, including rheumatism, gout, lowering fever, food poisoning, as well as curing headaches, hallucinations, high blood pressure, and typhoid. But the problem is, that science has produced little, if any, evidence to support a belief in the medical efficacy of rhino horn. And this is where long-held beliefs, passed down through the centuries and left unquestioned, can have some really serious consequences. And I think it's important for us to burst bubbles when those bubbles are full of untruth and complete lack of evidence, especially when it's causing harm to animals or people who can't defend themselves. These amazing animals are being senselessly slaughtered for what is a lie, a false belief. So using our passport, having a passport attitude in this sense, means standing up for what is right, being unafraid to challenge authority when that authority is perpetrating lies. Staying comfortably inside your bubble and choosing not to confront such lies is certainly an option, but it's a cowardly one. And now, on we go to Asia. A big lesson that I learned in Asia was the common bond of compassion in Mumbai. While in India, on 2 occasions in 2012, pages E and G in my passport, we ended both tours with a multi-day volunteerism extension in the massive city of Mumbai. It's India's largest metropolis. During both of those times of volunteering, we were made very aware of the overwhelming scope of need in the slums of that city. While in Mumbai, we toured Dharavi slum. It's a densely packed area with over 1 million residents. It's actually the site where the popular movie Slumdog Millionaire was filmed. And it was staggering to see the level of need in places such as this. The problems are way too big for any one person to solve on their own. But using your passport, having a passport attitude, means that you're willing to be confronted with difficult problems like those found in Mumbai, and that you're willing to roll up your sleeves to at least make a difference in the lives of a few people, even if you can't help everyone. Partnering with people of all different faiths or none at all, we found ourselves united in a common compassionate purpose during our time there, and it left a mark on each one of us that we won't soon forget. And I think you'll find your heart expanding when you use your passport in this way. Another great lesson in Asia comes from the hospitable and quiet world of the Bedouins in Wadi Rum. Jordan is one of my favorite little places in Southwest Asia. It's an amazing little country, page 10 in my passport, and I've been lucky to visit there 4 times, from 2009 to just a couple of Februaries ago. Petra is justifiably one of the most impressive sights on the planet, and a darn good place to walk. But one of the lesser known and equally beautiful locations in Jordan is the red, Mars-like desert of Wadi Rum. This is the landscape where Lawrence of Arabia made his name during World War I. It's where the movie The Martian with Matt Damon was filmed. And it's the home to the very hospitable and resourceful Bedouin people. One of my favorite Bedouin friends is Harb Zawaida. He's a leader in his community, a true gentleman and a very gracious host. The Bedouins excel at making you feel at home, demonstrating their hospitality in a variety of ways, whether it's tea served to you in the desert, a relaxing meal in their camel-hair tents, or treating you to an unrushed and serene sunset experience. Life seems to slow down in the desert, and you get the sense that the Bedouins place much more emphasis on taking time to enjoy family and friends than on keeping a strict calendar and a constant eye on the clock. You know, it's a refreshing thing to experience, especially for us Westerners who often tend to get way too busy and who rarely take time to savor meals with family and friends. Harb and his fellow Bedouins reminded me of the importance of putting people first and taking time for meals and conversation. And now we go to Antarctica, our most remote continent and a land with otherworldly beauty. To get to Antarctica, you generally have to brave the Drake Passage. This is an often turbulent body of water that separates South America from Antarctica. And because there are no land masses at this latitude to break up the flow of the colliding oceanic currents, the swells in the Drake can be quite massive, and they can cause great seasickness for those not prepared for the journey. The passage is named for Sir Francis Drake. He was the second person to circumnavigate the globe. In order to enjoy the rewards of seeing Antarctica, which are definitely worth it, you have to be willing to risk discomfort on the Drake. Sometimes we've had groups negotiate that passage without too much rough water, but others have not been so lucky. It's really a roll of the dice whether you're going to get the Drake Lake or the Drake Shake and Bake. And the Drake Passage, I think, is a really powerful reminder that in order to get to a desired destination in life, you often have to go through a rite of passage, whether it's passing the bar exam, or going through boot camp, or enduring morning workouts in order to reach a fitness goal, or going through the pain of a career change as I did in order to discover something better. So many areas of life are fraught with their own version of the Drake Passage, and it would be a whole lot easier if we didn't have to go through these kinds of churning and sometimes nausea-inducing journeys. But you don't enjoy the splendor of Antarctica without the Drake. So sometimes in life, you just have to embrace the Drake and look past the unsteady horizon to the reward that waits for you if you endure. Another fun memory from Antarctica, Funassyi. One of the funniest surprises of our Antarctic cruise in 2015 was the fact that we shared the voyage with Funassyi, a giant androgynous pear fairy who has become one of Japan's wildly popular characters among all ages, second only to Mickey Mouse. This oversized fruit was filming a kids special on Antarctica that involved Funassyi skiing and doing other polar activities. I actually shared a cabin with one of the Japanese film crew, the assistant director, so I had several of Funassyi's props in my cabin. At first, this character was annoying, and the film crew were a little too loud and exuberant during our initial cruise meetings. They thought that Funassyi would be welcomed by all travelers, but of course, none of us knew who he was, and kind of found it a bit juvenile at first, especially when Funassyi's shrieks were interrupting key moments of the orientation. Well, when the ship crew let Team Funassyi know that this was not okay, the Japanese were suddenly mortified that they had caused offense, and the next day, the director apologized to the ship passengers, all of us. Of course, being from a culture that places great emphasis on honor, they certainly didn't mean to offend. And from there on out, actually, Funassyi was actually kind of a fun addition to the cruise. It was really hilarious to watch these guys try to film their show in such crazy conditions. And I find it quite interesting when cultures interact and don't really know which characters or people are popular in the other culture. It can be a little awkward. Of course, everybody in Japan knows who Funassyi is, but we hadn't been introduced to him yet. Thanks to YouTube, other internet platforms, this knowledge gap is narrowing, but there still remains a gap. Adults and kids alike tend to go wild for Funassyi in Japan. Perhaps he'll catch on here, perhaps not. In any case, it made our spectacular Antarctic expedition even more unique than it already was. And I believe using your passport can introduce you also to surprising and unexpected characters. One more quick lesson from Antarctica. There's always a line at the post office. Port Lacroix, for example. It's the southernmost post office in the world, but there's still a line there. But at least you can interact with penguins while you wait. All right, moving on to Europe. 2 more continents to go. This is a favorite destination of mine, full of culture and beauty around every corner. And one important lesson that I learned came at a place called Babelplatz in Berlin. Babelplatz was the site of an infamous Nazi book burning on May 10, 1933, in Berlin. You see, one of the ways that totalitarian regimes or organizations try to maintain control over people is by limiting what information is available to them, by banning any thoughts or suggestions that there's another way to look at the situation. They're very much against people using their metaphorical passports. We wouldn't want people thinking for themselves, would we? You see, when our Eastern Europe group was in Berlin in 2016, and we visited Babelplatz on our walk, instead of charred books and academic ashes, there was instead a public outdoor reading library with colorful beanbags set up and families actually reading together. This was beautiful. This was in such stark contrast to the fearful, flame-throwing bibliophobes of the dastardly Nazi regime. There is a huge difference between an open society and a totalitarian one that is closed off to any outside, non-approved viewpoints. What we saw at Babelplatz was indeed glorious. It was a colorful case of taking a wrong and making it right. And using your passport sometimes allows you to see a society learn from its mistakes and to chart a new and healthier path. Another great European lesson, and this is a very important one, especially in this day and age, is about rising from the ashes of destruction and heartache. See, using your passport can introduce you to people and places that are deeply inspiring, and Warsaw, Poland certainly makes that list. You see, Warsaw was the scene of unbelievable heartache during World War II, and as a result of their fierce determination to resist the Nazis during the Jewish ghetto uprising of 1943 and then the more general Warsaw uprising of 1944, the Germans completely and vindictively leveled nearly the entire city. But this devastated capital of Poland has since been rebuilt and returned to its former glory. In fact, everything you see of Warsaw's World Heritage listed Old Town today, from the narrow burgher houses to the red brick buttresses of the Barbican, was reconstituted in the decades to follow. Its renaissance was based on Old Town plans and 18th century paintings by Bernardo Bellato. Several other Polish towns donated millions of bricks salvaged from their own devastated buildings to aid in the reconstruction of Warsaw. And I find Warsaw to be an inspiring place because of its ability to rise from the ashes and to rebuild. So many of us have gone through our own personal tragedies or great challenges, haven't we? When outside forces devastate us, like the loss of a loved one, a disease diagnosis, an abandonment from somebody you loved. The list goes on and on. In fact, it's never fun or desirable to be in a place of devastation, as Warsaw was in the mid-1940s. But when you make the decision to painstakingly rebuild your life after such setbacks, you're boldly proclaiming that defeat will not have the last word. The choice to remain in the rubble or to rebuild from it is a really important one, and I draw strength from places like Warsaw that chose the latter. One last brief lesson comes from the beautiful city of Prague in the Czech Republic. The marvelous Hradcany castle above the Vltava River was the site of a very unfortunate defenestration about 400 years ago. Defenestration is an underused word that simply describes the act of throwing someone or something out of a window. For example, sometimes when I travel, I practice what I call the defenestration diet. I simply throw it out the window and eat whatever I want. But in the case of this window, which is in the Prague castle, a defenestration took place in 1618 that precipitated the 30 Years' War, one of the bloodiest in European history. As you can imagine, the cause of the window launching was religious disagreement. It had to do with the Peace of Augsburg from 1555 that gave princes the right to determine the religions of their subjects, either Protestant or Catholic. In Bohemia, where Prague is located, the Habsburgs, who were Catholic, controlled the area, but they allowed greater rights to the Protestant populations there. Over time, however, there were others that came into power that had more of a counter-Reformation streak, and they clamped down more on the Protestants. So, frustrated by a lack of meeting their demands, a group of those Protestants threw 3 Catholic leaders out the window of that castle. The men survived the defenestration, but the incident sparked a bloody war that soon became about much more than religion, and it embroiled all of Europe. I think the defenestration of Prague is a great reminder that it's okay to throw bad ideas out the window, but not people. See, when we use our passport, either literally or metaphorically, we're going to be more and more likely to interact with people and ideas that are quite different than our native culture. And this can be an invigorating process, but also at times a very frustrating thing. When we see cultures or people who do things differently than us, or think in ways that are foreign to our mindset, there can be a temptation to just throw the baby out with the bathwater, or to defenestrate the person along with their ideas. Now, when you travel or you read widely, I think it's a wonderful thing to hear other people's ideas, even if you don't end up agreeing with them ultimately. It helps sharpen your thinking, and on some occasions you may find yourself even changing your mind. For any other ideas that you don't quite subscribe to, you know what? It's okay to defenestrate those, while still having respect and appreciation for the people that hold them. See, there's a big difference between throwing people out of a window and throwing bad ideas out the window. And finally, our last continent on this whirlwind journey around the globe, Australia, New Zealand, a land of outstanding scenic beauty and some really strange critters. Our first stop in Australia comes just south of Melbourne as we look for the cute and cuddly koala in the wild. This furry marsupial is one of the continent's iconic animals, along with its fellow marsupial, the kangaroo. It wasn't too difficult for us to find a koala, but what is difficult is to find one that's actually awake. That's because koalas generally sleep about 20 hours a day due to their poor, exclusively eucalyptus diet. They're not dining on cuisine that is rich in energy, and thus they end up wasting over 80% of their day in marsupial slumber. While they're cute, you can't exactly say that they're maximizing their hours on Earth. And I would say in a similar way, when we humans neglect a rich and robust mental diet, we too can slip into lethargic thinking and miss out on wonderful opportunities to explore and grow. I'll have more to say about that in a few minutes. sharing some resources with you for a rich and robust mental diet. Things that I hope will help you develop a passport attitude. But it is true, you are what you eat, and this pertains also to your study habits and what you choose to feed your brain. Using your passport is about investing in a well-rounded mental diet. You know, another great passport lesson comes from just across the Tasman Sea in New Zealand, which is home to the Maori people. These fierce Polynesian warriors were once known for instilling fear in their enemies through intimidation. Their traditional haka dance is still performed, as it was at a hangi feast we attended in 2016. But now the Maori are a very welcoming and hospitable people. They are but one example of a people group who were once legendary for their fierceness and for their warlike ways, and yet over time, they've become more peaceful and welcoming. They're a really great reminder that in spite of the 24/7 news cycle that would have you think that the world is trending toward more violence overall, we're actually trending toward becoming more peaceful. Steven Pinker's book, The Better Angels of Our Nature, bears this out in great detail, and with lots of proof to go along with the argument. There are obviously still problem spots in our world, and violence needs to be addressed and reduced even further. There's no doubt about that. Don't mean to minimize it at all. But we've come a long way, and the Maori are but one example of this positive trend. Using your passport helps you get beyond the overly alarmist news media that focuses on the spectacular but very unusual events. In spite of remaining problems, the world is actually a safer and more welcoming place than it once was, and you can feel good about exploring it. Now, during a pandemic, it's best to limit your exploring to what you can safely do at home, but generally speaking, the world is still a wonderful place to explore. And a final passport lesson comes from two New Zealanders that you've probably never heard of, Richard and Dawn Spark. The Sparks live on the South Island and reside in the quiet town of Rangiora. Several of our group stayed at their family home during our New Zealand farm stay just a couple of years ago. And on our last evening with them, Richard rather sheepishly invited us to take a look at his little museum that he had on his property. He really underplayed the amazing scene we were about to walk into, and what we found there was absolutely mind-blowing. Over the course of a few decades, Richard and Dawn have accumulated a vast and unexpectedly diverse treasure trove of artifacts that boggles the brain. Starting in 1982 with just a few milk bottles, Richard has expanded to 5 massive buildings worth of stuff. Lovingly cataloged, painstakingly arranged, he's built up a collection of items that was one of the great surprises during our visit to the South Island of New Zealand, ranging from intensely personal items like his mother's wedding dress and his father's World War I uniform and Bible, all the way to a chainsaw and a brick collection. You can rest assured that you've never seen anything like this museum on someone's personal property. It's a labor of love that caused our group members to smile with delight as they wandered the eclectic rows of this staggering personal museum. It got me to thinking, what is it about humans that drives us to collect stuff? Whether it be chainsaws, passport stamps, or bottles. In some cases, collecting can border on hoarding and end up controlling us in the process. But when it's done well, collecting can be a way to document both the extraordinary and the mundane artifacts that help us humans tell the story of who we are and what is important to us. You see, museums like Richard's and Dawn's are a great way for us to look back, to remember who we were, to increase our appreciation for who we are now. In some cases, there can be a longing for the good old days when life was perhaps simpler. But strolls through museums like this one also instill in me a sense of gratitude for the time and place that we now live. There are so many ways in which our lives have improved for the better. For example, the medical unit in Richard's museum reminded me of a time before anesthetic or antibiotics. I wouldn't want to go back to that era, would you? You see, it's only by intentionally looking back that we can truly appreciate where we've come from. In the same way, a walk through Richard's museum can also remind us of some lessons that we've forgotten or lost. Looking at his board game collection, I was reminded of times when families spent more time playing together, or the old-time radio room that reminds us of when families gathered together to listen to a program, and when our choices were more limited. Instead of every individual buried in their phone or computer, there was more shared interaction in previous times. Perhaps we're missing something in our rush to greater technology. Perhaps we can do better at remembering to foster human relationships and shared memories in our increasingly technological and individualized world. A walk through this museum sparked many helpful memories and helped me to reignite my passion to live a life that is full and meaningful. Also, we were told that Dawn is suffering from the early stages of dementia, something my father-in-law recently passed away from. And this reminds me that of all the things we collect in life, by far the most important and treasured keepsakes are our memories. And to the extent that artifacts help trigger those memories, these types of museums are a precious repository that should be cherished. Well, thanks for hanging in there with me. Our whirlwind trip to all 7 continents has concluded, but I want to offer you a few more suggestions for how you can develop a passport attitude in your own hometown, regardless of whether you ever travel beyond the borders of our country. You see, there are countless ways that you can be an explorer in your own neck of the woods, and some of these suggestions work very well while you're walking, for those of you who like to multitask. One of the biggest ways that I use my passport when back home is through an online subscription service called Great Courses Plus. This is what you might call a Netflix for binge learning. Great Courses Plus offers a huge library of well-produced video lessons. They're about 30 minutes each, and they cover such categories as history, travel, music, fine arts, professional and personal development, science, literature, language, philosophy, economics, finance, health and nutrition, and mathematics. Endless possibilities. These courses are taught by some of the finest scholars and practitioners in their respective fields. Each course can be watched on your computer, your phone, your tablet, as long as you're connected to Wi-Fi. Or in the case of iPhones and iPads, you can actually download the Great Courses Plus app and download individual episodes onto your phone for viewing even when you're not connected to Wi-Fi. And this makes for an educational library that's ultra portable, user-friendly. You can also create a customized watch list of lessons you'd like to check out when you have the time. Because the video lectures are good for just listening to also, I routinely listen to multiple courses while driving to and from work or while walking solo. So instead of binge watching on Netflix, you can do some binge learning and become a better educated, more well-rounded human. Some of the great courses that I've found helpful in recent months: Customs of the World, using cultural intelligence to adapt wherever you are; The Fundamentals of Photography, understanding the inventions that changed the world; Turning Points in Modern History; World's Greatest Geological Wonders; The Lost Civilizations of South America; Exploring the Polar Regions; U.S. and the Middle East. These are just a few, but Great Courses Plus is an awesome resource, and I've learned a ton just going on my normal walk in the neighborhood or driving to the office each day. It costs about $15 to $20 per month, which I think is a real bargain considering the college-level learning you'll have access to as a result. But if you want to save a little money, there are also online learning sites like Coursera and edX that allow you to audit classes from top universities for free, so you can check those out too. I also find that audiobooks can be checked out from my local library or downloaded on my phone. These could be a great way to learn and expand my borders a bit when I'm walking, driving, or doing chores around the house. Of course, a good old paperback book can do the same thing, but it's hard to walk when you do that. I think podcasts are also another great avenue for you to consider. These are great ways for you to use your passport for developing that passport attitude, whether you're at home or abroad. And there are a wide variety of good podcasts out there on a whole range of topics. I enjoy one called Presidents Are People Too, which is an informative and humorous look at several of our past presidents. This American Life is another good one. I also enjoy Fareed Zakaria GPS and Stuff You Missed in History Class. There's no one right podcast to listen to, but I think hearing from a variety of voices can be a good thing to have as part of your regular mental diet. Along with some of these suggestions, you can use your passport in your own backyard when you engage in intentional discussions with walking friends, or when you do walks in communities other than your own with people different than you, or when you volunteer or become an advocate for those in need. These are all great ways for you to expand your borders and develop an explorer's mindset. And the result is that you'll be a more well-rounded person with more to offer your world. Now let me just close by taking you to one last inspiring location: Plymouth, England. Most of us know that the Pilgrims famously sailed from this port city in 1620, bound for the New World and bound to become an important part of the fledgling American experiment. But many people are unaware of the many other significant maritime moments that have emanated from that one solitary English port. Here are just a few adventures that got their start or their finish in Plymouth. Sir Francis Drake, we talked about him a little while back. His circumnavigation of the world started from here, 1577. England's defeat of the Spanish Armada in 1588 happened from Plymouth. Pocahontas arrived in Plymouth from Jamestown in 1616. Captain James Cook, one of the greatest discoverers of all time, made his famous voyages of discovery from Plymouth. The English convicts were transported to Australia from Plymouth, among other places. Napoleon awaited his fate while held prisoner in Plymouth Sound. He was actually kind of a tourist attraction. People would come out to see him when he was held prisoner there. Charles Darwin's amazing voyage on the HMS Beagle in 1831 to 1836, that also happened from Plymouth. The Titanic survivors, many of them arrived in Plymouth Sound in 1912. Sir Ernest Shackleton, his incredible voyage to Antarctica, one of the greatest tales of survival you'll ever hear about, happened starting in 1914 from Plymouth. And Francis Chichester, a person I'm not really very familiar with, but he became the first solo circumnavigator of the world in 1967. So Plymouth, in many ways, has become a launching pad for discovery over the centuries. So many amazing journeys began or ended there. And you know what? For me, walking into an unexpected career as an international tour guide midway through my adult life became, in a way, my own personal Plymouth. It became a launching pad for multiple amazing journeys that have taught me so much about myself and about the world that I'm thrilled to be a part of. Let me encourage you to find your own personal Plymouth, a home base where you can launch your own voyages of discovery. Whether you're a working mom, a retiree, an active traveler, or more of a homebody, you know what? You can be a perennial pilgrim no matter who you are, always exploring, finding ways to better understand and improve the world around you. And you can use your passport in both literal and metaphorical ways, whether you walk in your subdivision or in sub-Saharan Africa. So in what unique ways can you use your passport and bust out of any self-imposed bubbles, becoming a better you and a better contributor to the world around you? I will say this, it's going to look different for each one of us, but I think our world will be a better place the more that we adopt a ravenously curious passport attitude. And I have a sneaking suspicion that many of you are already using your passports in some very significant ways. And I just want to encourage you to keep up the good work. Never stop growing or making new discoveries. And for Pete's sake, don't be afraid to cross some borders once in a while and to ask some new questions. It's part of what helps us all grow and expand our view of the world. And if you've been letting your passport gather a bit of dust, just know that it's never too late to shake off the cobwebs and start exploring again. You see, there's no expiration date on making new discoveries and becoming more curious about the world around you. We live in an unprecedented era when there have never been more opportunities to interact with this wide and wonderful world. So take advantage of this amazing moment in time. The only expiration date on discovery comes when you actually expire. And unless my little talk today has literally bored you to death, you're still on the right side of the dirt. You can still renew your commitment to being a border-crossing, question-asking, discovery-making, world-improving kind of person. If you've had the privilege of using your actual passport, please remember, those stamps in your passport, they're not just ink on a page or a simple collection of how many countries you've visited. Those passport stamps represent the discoveries you've made while walking, the people you've befriended on your journey, the interaction with new cultures, the ideas that made you think differently or perhaps reassess your values. It represents the stories that have made you laugh or that have broken your heart. It represents lives that you've impacted or that have made their mark on you. Those stamps in your passport represent meals shared and conversations around the dinner table or moments of pure joy that you will never forget. When you adopt a passport attitude, those stamps represent more than just places to check off the bucket list. They indelibly mark both the simple and significant moments in your life that have helped you grow as a human. There's a great big world out there just waiting for you to explore it, and you can do so in a variety of ways, learning as you keep on walking. All it takes is a willingness to get beyond your bubble and a passport attitude. Thanks so much for taking this journey with me today. Take care.